Struck by Lightning. Story number 5. After the Fact. Part 1. Convenient Revelation. I'm married, Charles revealed as they lay there in bed after a hot, steamy sex romp that made her see stars. Joan laid there trying to reconcile what she had just heard, while also trying to collect her mind after having the best release of her life. She wondered, as she lay there saying nothing, if she had known all along and had been in denial. She could not believe that she just had no clue, but then she realized it was because she'd had no intentions of ever getting hooked up with this man at the time he started his pursuit. He didn't wear a ring, and she remembered noticing that and feeling it was enough to decide he couldn't be married, especially the way he would show up at her job and call her. She didn't even get a chance to look around much because they ended up in his apartment unexpectedly, meaning it wasn't on the agenda of their date. And now that she thought more about it, she thought that he must have had it on his agenda all along. Joan got up and scanned the room, and it seemed like things started to appear that were evidence of a woman having been there. She climbed out of the bed and quickly threw her shirt on and ran to the bathroom that was in the bedroom. She stood there completely amazed, as it was immediately evident that a woman lived in that apartment. "What the fuck? How could you bring me here? Are you trying to get me killed?" She was furious, more at herself than anything else. She stomped over to the bed and accidentally kicked over some framed pictures that were stacked under the bed. She leaned down to see what it was that she had kicked over. "You hid her pictures?" Joan was flabbergasted that he had gone through that trouble before picking her up. What kind of man is this? She wondered. Charles began mumbling something about putting the pictures under there a while ago because he didn't want to look at them. Joan felt heat rising to the top of her head, and she quickly put her clothes on and asked him to take her home. "And I mean now," she shouted. Charles had approached Joan one day as she was working in the neighborhood store, and she smiled at him just like she did to almost everyone who came in the store. People were attracted to her naturally anyway, so she didn't think it was odd that this guy came over to her smiling to buy some candy. He wasn't the first man who had decided her smile was an invitation. After he bought the candy, he asked her what her name was. She answered, and then quickly and skillfully moved the conversation by asking him if he was registered to vote. She would do things like this to try to let guys know she wasn't flirting, but just being friendly. But Charles was quite persistent. She did register him to vote, and then he left the store. 5 minutes later, he came back and asked her if she needed a ride home. She declined his offer because she had a car there. Then he asked her for her phone number, which she declined to give to him. Then she looked at his hands and saw no wedding band, so she figured he was not married. Mistake number 1, she thought as they headed out the door to his car. After the Fact, Part 2, Resistance. But if I told you I was married when I met you, you wouldn't have talked to me," he said as they got in the car. She was disgusted and wanted to tell him to shut up, but she let him go on. And he went on to explain stereotypically that he was having problems with his wife and that they were separated. He claimed that she hadn't moved out yet because she was trying to set something up with her sister. But it began to sound like womp, womp, womp to her as his words droned on until she finally interrupted to say, "That was no excuse." Joan reflected on how, after light, flirtatious conversation with him and her resistance at the store where they first met, she told him he could call her at the store if he wanted to talk to her. She figured that would put him off, but it didn't. 2 days later, he called the store and asked to speak to her. Charles was baffled by the fact that she wouldn't give him her phone number. He said he was calling from his job and wanted to stop by the store to pick her up so they could go for a ride. He said he wanted to get to know her. She made up some excuse and declined. When she left the store, he was sitting in his car in the parking lot. Now, she couldn't deny that she was flattered by his pursuit, and he was a really good-looking guy, which should have been another clue, she decided. But she convinced him that she had somewhere to go that night and that she could not go for a ride with him. They talked for a little while in the parking lot, and she was beginning to feel her shield weaken because of his smile and attention. After the Fact, Part 3, The Old Man. Joan found herself thinking about Charles more and more, and she even decided that maybe he was all right since he had a job and a car. She was so tired of meeting men who didn't have a driver's license for whatever reason, and she had met many of them. "And he has a job, and he has a nice smile," she thought to herself, as she kept toying with the idea of maybe letting him in. She really didn't want to let him in because she had just gotten out of a relationship with a man that she grew apart from. He was an older man and insecure man who constantly told her that he knew she would leave him for a younger man. Joan never wanted that to be true, especially since that wasn't the reason she grew tired of him. The fact was that she just wasn't satisfied sexually with her older man, and she felt very bad about it. She didn't even know how to tell him because he was so good to her in almost every other way. But her frustration and the fact that she wouldn't tell him how tired she was of his limp dick led her to picking fights with him for other reasons. She kept thinking about trying to suggest using Viagra to this old man and was shocked that he never thought of it on his own. She didn't even know a man's penis could be so small until she met this old man either. And still, she tried to hang in there with this older man and did for a little over 3 years. He was an expert at oral sex, and she understood why. But that was short-lived compensation because she craved the feeling of that warm thickness and penetration. Joan's frustration came to be expressed in other ways, and they began arguing over things that previously seemed trivial. And then he finally started giving her reasons to leave him by hanging out more at the bar with his buddies and getting drunk. She began to see a light at the end of the tunnel with him. Before this, she just could not figure out how to leave him without hurting his feelings. He was an older man and had repeatedly told her that he suspected she would leave him for a younger man, and he really was wrong about that. She began to think that maybe he kept saying this because he was in denial about the real reason he suspected she would leave him. Either way, she didn't want him to be right about her leaving him for a younger man because it wasn't his age that bothered her. Yet, she didn't have the courage to tell him what was really wrong. The old man began standing her up. He would go out with his buddies after work and never make it to her apartment. Joan would be furious, and she just added these incidents up to reach the crescendo she was building to. And then finally, she told him they had to part ways and simply ran down the list of reasons. She never said that sex with him was just too frustrating. She couldn't bring herself to tell him even then. He accused her of seeing someone else, and that wasn't true. Yet here it was, about 3 weeks after she had that conversation with her old man, and she was already contemplating checking out this guy who was in hot pursuit of her at the store. After the Fact, Part 4, Infatuation. Joan justified her clouded judgment to get with Charles by considering the long-term sexual frustration caused by the relationship she had just gotten out of. Charles continued to call and come by the store for another couple of weeks, and they would talk and laugh, and finally, she agreed to go out with him. He drove to a park that was in another city, and they walked through the park, and she thought that was nice. They talked, and then under a tree, he pulled her to him and kissed her with the most passionate kiss she had had in a while. And there was the crux of the problem, she figured. They stared at each other, and she all of a sudden let her guard down and was ready for more. But she put the brakes on after more embracing, and back to his car they went, and he took her home. The next night, their juices still flowing from the night before, Charles called her at the store, picked her up, and they went to a nice restaurant for dinner. When they got into his car afterward, he drove off in a direction unfamiliar to her, and as it turned out, they were headed for his apartment. He parked, and before she could even reach for the door handle, he was at her door opening it. Gee, a gentleman, she was thinking as she stepped out of his car. Joan followed him to the door, and he fumbled around with the keys and finally opened it. Both were a little nervous as this was all happening so fast, yet they both wanted each other really badly by now. And making love with one another was, unfortunately, even better than either of them thought it would be. It was phenomenal, fantastic. So her mind boggled as she pondered the statement he had just made. You know, I'm married. Right after the most fantastic orgasm she had ever had. She turned to look at him as he drove, and he glanced over with a sheepish grin on his face. He began to apologize, but she told him to just shut up. She asked him how he could withhold information like that, and why would he do this to his wife. He went through the stereotypical diatribe again about how he and his wife were having problems and were separating. After the Fact, Part 5, Other Women. The fact was that it wasn't even the first time Charles had done this to his wife. Yet, he knew his wife would find herself forgiving him because usually once she allowed him to have sex with her, she would decide that he loved her and wanted her. And then his wife would tear herself down by convincing herself that he must have stepped out on her because she had done something wrong. Charles' wife cried to a girlfriend of hers when he moved out one time, and she decided it was because she had gained weight. He came back one night after being gone for about 3 weeks, driving his girlfriend's car, and his wife allowed him to spend the night. He told her he was considering moving back in with her, and she was so happy that she forgot she was even mad that he was driving the other woman's car. His wife felt wanted again, and felt like she had won him back from that other woman. Never once did she consider that he made this choice because the other woman did not want to take him on full time with all his baggage. And he did eventually move back in with his wife, and they stayed together for years until she finally mustered up the strength to leave him. His wife left because she found out that he had never stopped seeing that girlfriend whose car he was driving before he moved back in. She made that discovery after he had been in a car accident and ended up in the hospital. She walked in and saw flowers there, which his girlfriend had had the nerve to put her name on. Charles lied and told her it was a business associate, but his wife knew better. Charles' wife left him after that, and as soon as he got out of the hospital, the girlfriend left him hanging too. He quickly met another woman and began bringing her to his apartment about a month after his wife moved out. He got so comfortable that he left the new girlfriend there in the bed one morning and went to work. Meanwhile, his wife decided unexpectedly to stop by the apartment to pick up more of her clothes and things she had left behind. She used her key and went right inside. The new girlfriend heard the door open and saw a reflection of Charles' wife in the mirror. She ran to hide in the closet. Charles' wife went directly to the closet and tried to open the door, but she couldn't get it open. She pulled on it again, and this time she saw a hand attached to the inside doorknob, which startled her. She jumped back in shock and then realized what was going on. She began to scream, "Get out of my closet, you whore!" But the woman would not let go of that doorknob. Finally, his wife gave up and just left. The woman came out of the closet and grabbed her clothes and ran out of the door, and she never looked back. Charles decided that there was no use in revealing these other events to Joan because he felt that his wife was at fault for coming to the house without letting him know. She had left after all and had not come back for a month, even though the reason was because she knew he was cheating on her. After the Fact, Part 6, physical magnetism. So, as he continued to drive, he went on with his story, stating that his wife would be moving out soon and that he'd had a strong attraction to Joan since the first time he saw her working in the store. He then told her he wanted to see her again and apologized again for bringing her to his apartment without telling her about his soon-to-be ex-wife, as he put it. She was completely mad, and she was even madder because she wanted him. She felt like her head was spinning when he finally pulled up to her apartment. She began to think about it and decided that this affair would be temporary. She convinced herself that she would not fall in love with him. She turned to him and told him this, and he said okay, and then asked her when he could see her again. She hesitantly said, "Call me." She was feeling very torn and rotten about the whole thing. She hated the idea of being with someone's husband, but he did say they were separating. Charles called her the next day at the store, and Joan told him not to come there. She was really wrestling with her feelings about this. She had been starving for that feeling that he gave her after she had just gotten out of the most sexually frustrating relationship she had ever been in. So now here she was sweating over a man who had made her see stars in one of the most climactic orgasms she had ever had. And his ass is married. Damn. When she left the store, there he was, as usual, sitting there smiling. She melted and walked right over to his car. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you." She felt all tingly inside, something she hadn't felt in years, just standing there talking to him. This is a curse, she thought to herself as she found herself climbing into his car, where they eventually embraced and had the best kisses in the world, as he put it. Off to a sleazy short-stay motel they went. She decided that she could keep her distance better if she didn't let him come to her apartment. But she did finally give him her phone number that night. And this went on for months. And although she was not proud to be a mistress of this man, she realized after learning more about him that she did not want him to leave his wife because she was afraid that he would want to move in with her. She had no desire to take this man on full time. The more she found out about him, the more she realized that she could never encourage this man to leave his wife. Charles was his wife's problem, and she was not willing to bring this mountain of issues into her life. He had a mountain of back child support that he was paying on, which meant he was usually broke because he didn't make that much money to begin with. The problem was that there was something about him that kept her drawn to him, especially in the safety of her buffer zone. The buffer zone being her refusal to give him a key to her place or to allow him to come there much. Charles asked her for a key once, but she told him no and said that he could not have a key as long as he was married. After the Fact, Part 7, Entanglements. Charles' wife did not particularly love him in a way that made her want to just run up and kiss him when they were together. But whenever he did decide to have sex with her, she decided that he still loved her. sex between them had really degraded to a duty she provided as his wife on the occasions when he desired it. Most of the time, he didn't even sleep in the same room with her, and he told her it was because she snored. His wife became so insecure that she could not imagine her life without him in it, even if only to be able to appear married to her family and friends. They were young when they got married, and she felt very proud to have him with her because he was so light-skinned and tall. He already had 2 children before she married him, and then, after repeated cheating incidents over the years, their relationship had suffered, and she held an angry grudge that allowed her to use guilt as a weapon against him. They both made excuses to themselves as to why they stayed together, including the fact that they were just used to each other and that they had 3 children together. Their youngest daughter has a half-brother who was the same age as her because he had gotten another woman pregnant around the same time his wife got pregnant. The outrage his wife felt once she learned about the other child sent her into a raging storm. Their new baby was only 1 month old when this particular girlfriend had hers. He ended up telling his wife because he wanted to see his new son. She screamed for him to leave, but he wouldn't leave, and she knew he wouldn't leave. She hated the fact that she loved him, and she hated the fact that she loved having a husband that looked like him. She hated the fact that she did not want to let him go and end up like so many women she knew who had no man. After the Fact, Part 8, Baby Mamas. How much of this could she take? His wife would wonder many times on that. She knew Charles was not faithful and that he never had been, even before they got married. He convincingly promised that he would never cheat on her again when she agreed to marry him. At that time, he was unemployed, and they were already living together and had a son 2 years before that anyway. He had soon found a job, though, and then they went to the Justice of the Peace and got married. This made his wife feel that he had finally changed, and she was very hopeful about their family. And that was why his wife was so outraged when he revealed to her that he had another child who was born 1 month after his wife had their baby daughter. His wife was so hurt at learning about the other child that she packed some things and moved in with her mother for a short while. And it was only a short while, because she began to miss him, and he knew how to pour on the charm. Charles was confident that he could get her to come back, and he knew he only needed to give her a little time to cool off. But his wife came back a bit more ferocious after learning about the other child. She had a fury inside that was evident in her aura. Forgiveness was not complete this time, but it was overridden by her desire to have him in her life. She demanded that he have nothing whatsoever to do with the other child, and he agreed. But by this time, he had seen his other child while his wife was with her mother. He needed his wife to move back in so she could help with the bills and rent. So he was prepared to agree to just about anything. She knew his need, and she decided to feel sorry for him, which was ludicrous, but it became part of her justification for getting back together with him. The woman who had his son discovered after they started seeing each other that he was married, and she decided to keep up the affair for a while. When she got pregnant, she had already decided that she would keep the child. She did not want Charles to leave his wife either, and when she told him she was pregnant, he almost seemed happy. He stood there and said, "I knew it," and then asked her what she planned to do about it. She told him she planned to keep the baby, but that she did not plan to pursue anything from him. She told him to go on and be with his wife, as if she had him pegged to be her sperm donor. He was shocked and almost insulted at the way she dismissed him. She knew that his wife had just had their baby. What Charles didn't know was that she was making plans to move out of state. And she let him know the day she was leaving with his son. And he put up a minor argument about not being able to see his child if she moved away. But it all kind of fell in place once his wife got back, since she demanded that he not have anything to do with the other child. After the Fact, Part 9. Get what you want. So here it was, years later, and he had stepped out again in his familiar charade. Charles had never worn his wedding band, and his wife never put up too much fuss about that. His wife should have forced him to wear his ring, Joan thought, as she opened the door to let him in one day when he came by after work. By now, they were through playing games, such as him meeting her at the store she worked at, and she went ahead and gave him her address. He immediately began to come to her apartment, a lot, whenever he got the chance. He told his wife he was going to see one of his buddies who covers for him all the time when he decided to see her. Joan began to feel a little uncomfortable as he became more comfortable. He began demanding that she call him on his cell phone or at his house when his wife wasn't home, because by this time his wife was back in the apartment full time again. This was an argument they would have periodically, because Joan kept telling him that it made no sense to take chances like that. In reality, she just didn't want to increase her violation this way. She felt it was bad enough that she was in a relationship with this woman's husband. Joan just wanted to draw a line somewhere. So the day that he had finally convinced her to call him one afternoon when he stayed home from work, he learned why it was a bad idea. He knew she would be getting her nails done that afternoon because she was off that day from work, and he decided to take the day off for another reason, which included getting a chance to see Joan. Charles insisted that she call him as soon as she was done at the nail salon, which she did reluctantly. He met her in an inconspicuous place, parked his car, and got in hers, and off they went to a sleazy short-stay motel just for the thrill of it. After phenomenal, mind-blowing, orgasmic sex that brought them both to the point of gazing into each other's eyes and knowing they were terribly hooked on each other, they finally got up and got out of there. And she was feeling all giddy, like she was walking on air, as both of them went their separate ways. And then she realized there were messages on her cell phone. She hadn't even heard it ring. When she listened, she was outraged to find out it was his wife. He had forgotten to clear the caller ID before he left. This beautiful afternoon that had left her in such a good mood ended up being abruptly ruined in a traumatic way. She was shaken by the torrent of names she was called as his wife cursed her out without even taking a breath, ending with, "Stay your fucking ass away from my husband." Somehow, Charles was able to calm his wife down about this once again with another obvious lie. After getting past that bump in the road, Joan enjoyed having him around on her terms. She did not want him in her life full time because he was a controlling and, in some ways, immature man. Beyond making passionate love the way they had been for months, she did find that she wanted more out of their relationship, but not enough to push him to leave his wife and bring him into her life with all of his baby mama drama and financial baggage. There were times that she wanted to take him along on some vacations with her, but he was always afraid, and also he could not afford it. Even when she told him she could cover the expenses, he wasn't comfortable doing that. On rare occasions, Charles managed to spend some time with her on various holidays, but she seemed to always feel that he had to leave too soon. He began to leave his cell phone in his car because his wife would start calling soon after he got there, as if she had some kind of intuition regarding his whereabouts. Joan became conscious that she had to remind herself that she was very successful and owned her home, and that she just did not need him moving in with his drama and baggage, and she realized her freedom in that regard, which made her feel a little better. She also felt that she'd feel a lot better had she never started this relationship with Charles. She was glad that she never gave him a key to her apartment. It was weird how she and the wife kept this going for years, staying way out of each other's ways, and it seemed everyone was getting what they wanted out of the deal, somewhat.